Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton and Earl Boske. It's been a busy week. Well, most weeks are busy. There's no shortage of material to talk on any week. But this week, a tragic week for Dominica, our neighbors to the north, battered by Tropical Storm Erica. I'm tempted to say hurricane because of the amount of damage inflicted, you know, but more and more we're learning to take these weather systems seriously and not, you know, for granted, as I think a lot of us have come to over the years. Before we delve into that, let's look at some of the headlines making today's newspapers. The Voice newspaper, vehicle licenses up from Tuesday. Ladies in hats raises dollars for Upton Gardens Girls Center. The nationwide government newspaper, St. Lucia over the top in Beijing, a reference to our two athletes representing the island over there. And of course, they also featured on the cover of the Star insert, Sports and Health. The Mirror newspaper, SALCC, South Louis Community College students, a blast fee increase. And the Star newspaper, Kenny Knows Best, also referencing the school fee hike. Blame it on VAT, also one of the headlines. And let's not forget our Voice insert, the Yo magazine, Faces of Lucian Comedy, and your favorite, the Tonight magazine, featuring our cover girl today, Silverine. Yeah, I like Silverine. Yeah, but Dominica, Erica ravages Dominica, one of the headlines in the Mirror newspaper. 14 dead, more than 20 missing. I've not been able to make any contact with our colleagues over in Dominica. I've tried via cell phone. At the time I did, the cell phones were still down. I tried social media, haven't got any response. But I got one response from the sports guy at DBS. That's the station over there in Dominica, Richards. He hadn't experienced any personal loss, you know, but we've seen some of the footage coming out of Dominica. Devastating damage done. As we reported, 20 persons missing, 14 dead. We had the Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit over here on Thursday, I believe it was, meeting with the Prime Minister, updating him on what was happening over there. I had been monitoring what was happening over there via DBS and Kyrie FM. And you were remarking before we started how, you know, the cell phones and other means of communication have been down, and people have been using social media and the internet to keep in touch. As I was listening to DBS, that kind of highlighted that point to me as well. People who were not able to make contact with their family were able to contact the station, you know, and ask for updates from their families. Their families were able to call the station and report, you know, we are fine, you know, I'm reporting damage in the areas. So it's an interesting evolution of technology and disaster communication. I know Lionel Ellis of the local Amateur Radio Association, Ham Radio, always highlights, you know, the fact that, you know, that group is always underappreciated until disaster strikes. So we arrive at times like these, you know, and you were remarking about how Radio Antilles before was a valuable source of communication. Dr. Anthony, in interviews with the media up to yesterday, had pointed out that the local Marine Police have been sent over to Dominica. They should arrive there around midday today, I believe, to offer assistance in the search and rescue efforts over there. I listened to DBS and Kyrie FM, as I said, and we heard some of the constituency representatives or district representatives from over there reporting on the status of their districts. I heard a couple of them break down. Obviously, it's not an easy time for Dominica. 290 square miles, I believe, a population of about 72,000 people, significantly larger than us in land mass, but smaller in population. And I know it's a very close-knit country. Everybody knows everybody and is related to everybody there. So, as Dr. Anthony pointed out, the sense of loss, you know, is magnified because everybody is somehow connected or related over there. It also highlighted, as Prime Minister Roosevelt pointed out, the issue of climate change, you know, and how small island developing states like us, you know, stand to be impacted. You know, and as we prepare for the meeting in Paris later this year, you have a very real example, you know, how it is we are impacted. This is not a hurricane, as we said before, it's a tropical storm, you know, and we had the experience ourselves with the Hurricane Thomas and the trough. The trough. That was when 2013, December 2013.
Hurricane Thomas 2010, and the trough December 2013.
Yeah,
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, in terms of the disaster, we're talking about the fact that we were not able to make contact with some of our colleagues over there. I keep remembering, as I was saying, that a point that you always make, that we are not just journalists, but we are also citizens. We are experiencing the same things as everybody else, and we are expected to cover these incidents. Whereas we're talking about the trough, while we were sitting here covering the trough, and I was stuck on air for 8 hours, concerned about the condition of my own home. I'd also just lost my father at the time, not to anything related to the trough, you know, but you know, you experience those things in a very real, very personal way, and to cover them objectively. I know a couple reporters from Dominica as well, to Alison Kentish from HTS is also from Dominica. I'm not sure if her family has been impacted, you know, but the point was made by Andre Paul and Russell Lake yesterday, how very real and very personal it is for her. In terms of, and we can talk about this later on, there's some other issues I want to touch on in terms of journalists' exposure to violence and that sort of thing. But our own coverage of the Dominica episode, how have you rated it?
I think, first of all, in situations of crisis like that, we naturally would want to know about the damage, death, and destruction aspect of it, rescue and recovery. These are the things, the natural things that would come to mind in terms of, again, our personal concern for our neighbors, for safety of humanity. But in terms of coverage, I think the point that Prime Minister Skerrit made, the need for us to be able to relate these phenomena to something. And it is, in fact, as he correctly pointed out, a situation evolving from climate change. And it allows us, for example, in as much as we, the journalists, understand the implications of climate change for small island developing states. If we do, then we'll be able to say to St. Lucia that this time it was Dominica, but we are also vulnerable. We're all vulnerable. But then we look at the pattern. You know, we grew up knowing a hurricane as something every now and then, over, long periods of time, and it has evolved into hurricanes being more frequent. It has evolved into changed weather patterns, where you have drought in the rainy season,
as we experiencing,
drought in the dry season, in the rainy season, and rain in the dry season. The whole question of the international link, why is that happening? Why are we having more hurricanes? The link between the greenhouse emissions, and global warming, its effect on melting the ice in the north, going into the water, rising the oceans. We will not see it, but we can measure it from the standpoint of how it affects our shores, how the water in the harbor rises, and we'd be able to point out to people it's not only us. You look at the heat waves in Europe that end up taking mainly lives of elderly people in these so-called developed societies. We look at the frequency of tornadoes in the United States. They're complaining that, they're more regular and more devastating now than ever before. The snow, there's more snow over longer periods of time at stranger times in North America, USA, and Canada. So climate change is global. And what happened in Dominica, as the Nemo people pointed out, it could have been us. In less than a week, we escaped Danny and Erica. But then we got as you correctly pointed out, we got Thomas and the Trough 3 years apart. But then we and Dominica have been through it together. Back in 79 and 80, Hurricane David and Hurricane Allen battered both Dominica and St. Lucia. So we've been along that road, and now with the Caribbean having a significant role to play at the Conference of Parties on climate change in December, because the chairperson, France is in the chair. And through Martinique being part of the OECS, the OECS therefore has a direct access to and influence through the chair. The Caribbean has been asked to come up, and we came up with for the France Declaration on the 9th of May, the same day that President Obama was meeting others elsewhere. And Dominica, unfortunately, if we could say we could get something good out of a bad, if we can describe it that way, would be to use, as the Prime Minister pointed out, use the situation to say to the rest of the world, this is what we're talking about when we say we have to resist climate change and we're vulnerable, because we only produce in the Caribbean 0.3% of greenhouse gases, 0.3%. But those who produce all of the rest are not paying up, because at the last conference, at these international environmental conferences, the major countries admit that they are the major contributors to global warming, and they agree to pay certain amounts of money annually to a green fund to help developing countries and small island developing states who are vulnerable to combat the effects. But what is happening is that, as with many other institutions, like as with pledges to Palestine and other places, they pledge, but they don't deliver. Neither in full amount nor in the speed, so that the climate change is getting worse. And the cost of repairing it is getting bigger. More countries are, look at, in that case, look, as we said, in Dominica it was a tropical storm and did so much devastation. What if it was a hurricane? In our case, up until the Christmas Eve trough, the only trough I knew was trough. You put pig food in a trough. We might have been hearing it every day on the weather report, but as a journalist, I don't pay attention to weather reports except around, when I have to, and that should not be. But all I might have been hearing about the use of the wood trough. I never paid attention to it. Now everybody knows. We look again the cyclical nature of natural disasters. When we grew up, we never heard of a tsunami. It happened. One happened in Indonesia and another in Japan, and tsunami is a household word now. We grew up knowing tidal waves, but we never saw one. We saw that in movies. Now, my understanding is tsunami is more of a Japanese word for tidal wave. But when Nemo said, and the CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Management Organization, after the Japanese experience, they suggested that there should be a simultaneous exercise to prepare for a tsunami. And I was one of those who said, what happened? We just got in style or what? We just want to shadow everybody.
Follow fashion.
Yeah, and follow fashion. Until one of the guys who heard me say that pointed out that no, we're at risk, because when a tsunami travels, it keeps on, the wave keeps on going until it gets land, and it could come from whatever distance. As you reminded, the one in Indonesia ended up all the way in Africa.
Yeah, and as we have learned since, that's even more real for us because of the predictions coming out of the seismic unit in Trinidad and Tobago.
In Trinidad,
the Caribbean is overdue for, yeah.
And then yesterday, a frequent caller to my program pointed out something that...
Specify which program, because you have so many.
Oh, sorry, I have a frequent caller to all at large,
right.
Yeah, on WVent. He called to point out that, and that many people didn't know, the world's biggest underwater volcano sits below Mexico. And if the size, depth, size, and danger of it is such that if it ever happens, we're close to Mexico.
Yeah.
This whole region is going to feel it, and it will be the biggest the world will have ever seen. So I think that we have to see, the lesson here is that we have to see hurricanes, tropical storms, natural disasters, yes, react the same way in terms of sympathy, support, and solidarity, but we need to, as journalists, be able to sensitize people to the fact that, one, we're never safe, and two, there's a reason it's happening, and three, there's a reason why we have to do what we can to combat climate change, you know, and don't see it as a government thing, because we can do things to combat climate change. One of the reasons the climate change issue isn't moving as fast as it should is because of the conflict between Christianity and science, or between religion and science, in that both communities accept that there is climate change. Both communities accept that weather patterns are changing for the worse, but some see it as acts of God, and the others see it as acts of man. And but they all represent governments, you know, and cannot agree on what is the reason. So while the scientists are saying the reason is greenhouse gases, the religious fraternity is saying, listen, we're paying for our sins.
Yeah, I see that as acts of God through man. But you raise a couple of interesting points. In terms of climate change, we reported on the visit by Prime Minister Elizabeth Skerrit, and the subject of climate change was touched on in passing because he said it, he mentioned it, but nobody said anything further than that. And it'll be interesting in the coming days and weeks to see if that, as the Dominica situation evolves, and because obviously this is a major blow to the country, is going to take a good bit of time before they can recover. I'm using Thomas and the Trough as an example.
We're still recovering.
Exactly. So that's likely to be in the news for a while, but it'll be interesting to see how many news stations and newspapers take this story in the direction that we've just been talking about, climate change, and expanding on it and explaining to the public and the readers and audiences how it is climate change stands to impact all of us in all the different spheres that it stands to impact us, whether it's from the economic perspective, health, you know, and the like.
And without you going, before I go,
go ahead.
And being able to define those different phenomena. What is a trough? What is a tropical storm? What is a hurricane? The difference between a storm and a hurricane. The difference between a tropical storm and a storm. The guy I was speaking about, who's quite experienced, was given a description of what is a trough, which is, he's saying basically the cloud of rain stands still because there's no wind to push it on, and it is going to stay there. What we had was clouds of rain above St. Lucia in the absence of any wind.
Yeah, for how many? Over 24 hours?
For over 24 hours, and you know, and that was what it was. And but the simple way in which he explained it, I'm not sure the weather people, and that is a pet peeve I've had throughout my experience in journalism, that the weather people should be careful not to come across as speaking to themselves or preaching to the converted. Shelton Daniel was in the weather business before he came into journalism, and I often discuss with him the need maybe for the media fraternity, media association or media houses to bring the people who write the weather reports together, because there's a classic way in which they do it. But I often say, translate that in Creole for me. You know, and then translate it back in English that people will understand. I don't think we are as much interested in the figures and the technical terms as much as wanting to know if it's going to be raining, you know, who should look out, what to expect, you know, fishermen, a warning for fishermen, identify who would be most threatened as a result of this.
And in the absence of that, I think that is why perhaps a lot of people, including myself, and as you pointed out, you too, sometimes are dismissive of the weather until a certain period or season arrives. You know, some people listen to the news and switch once sports weather comes on,
move to something else.
Because you don't understand the terms,
the technical
terms.
And
even as a broadcaster myself who has delivered weather reports as an on-air announcer.
And I mean, there is some consciousness at the department about the value of their service, because there's a new style now. You have to see who prepared it, you know, so that the individual officers do get the PR for as having prepared today's report. But then, you know, the presenters too. I have seen in other stations elsewhere where the presenter would give you, you know, the images of what to expect. You know, the last time this thing happened, that is what happened. You know, if this thing develops, that is what it's going to do like. It also brings me across to even what I saw as a nice way of advertising. Here you have the airport, an ad about the status of progress on the airport, and it can show that they have done stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. They're at stage 5, and there are 2 more stages to go. So I think that those who are advertising or giving information, particularly as it relates to weather, as in this case, given what we were discussing, they have a bigger role to let people understand, and they can be that link. They were meant to be that link between that link to those of us who don't understand the link between the weather report and what we feel as a result. You know, the weather report will not change the fact that the hurricane is coming, but if we know it's coming, we start to think of how we can prepare.
But you see, it would be interesting, maybe it's a financial issue as well. If every station had a meteorologist on staff, you know, perhaps that could help, because I'm not a trained meteorologist. I'm interested in the weather because there's a system coming that may likely impact the island, and I want the viewers and listeners to learn, to know, to be prepared. So they convey the information to me, and to whatever degree I understand it or can get them to break it down, simplify it, then I regurgitate it and bring it back across.
No, I think,
and sometimes it might get lost in translation.
No, I think I don't think in that case. I mean, why isn't RSL making use of Shelton and have him doing the weather reports in language?
But I've heard him explain a lot of stuff on his
show
program.
Yeah, on his show.
You know,
no, I think
interestingly, I got a better understanding of what was happening with Erica. Watching a U.S. channel than listening to any local weather report, because that level of dissecting and explanation was not present. They just gave you the raw facts, but you had a meteorologist explaining, okay, this is what's happened, this is what's likely to happen, this is why
that's what I'm talking
this system has meteorologists confused now, because it could go this way, it could go that way, because of X, Y, Z factors, you know. So I got a clear picture.
That is why I think that it has to start at the Met Office. I think a decision has to be taken. The Met Office doesn't exist to give information to the press. It exists to monitor and pass it on. It has been doing so all the time. Its work will not be known if not through the press. So my suggestion here would be that the Met Office be staffed with a production unit, you know, and journalists who are going to understand the terms and help them package, you know, the report that goes to everybody.
Yeah.
So everybody has that
yeah.
report, which has been packaged with the intention that the so-called simplest mind would understand. People would not still say, hey, but I don't understand. You know, try and make sure that people understand every term. Once upon a time, editors or writers of editorials used to exhibit their intellect by making sure in every editorial there's 4 or 5 words that people have to go and look up in a dictionary. You know, that's counter to communication.
Yeah.
So,
but they might see that fulfilling the educational role.
You know,
by sending to the dictionary.
You
know, but I always remember Guy Ellis reminding us, that was my editor, my first editor, always write with the man in the banana field in mind.
Exactly. That's the so-called simplest.
Yeah, but that's a fantastic idea that you have about the Met Service. But we do for a break. Let's take the break. When we come back, we can look at some of the other stories in the news. We'll be right back.